Hello Witcher fans, how are you doing today? So back in 2019, when The Witcher first released on Netflix, I did a video comparing the Netflix show and the books to explain all the changes that happened in the TV series. In that video, I also had an easy to understand timeline of events as they happened in the show. Thankfully, this time around we don't have to deal with that. Season 2 of The Witcher follows one straight storyline, so it is much easier to understand. However, this season's biggest issue is the fact that it is mostly filler. We'll get to that later, but first, let us start at the beginning with episode 1 titled A Grain of Truth. The very first episode of season 2 is actually the strongest episode of the season. Netflix made like minimum changes for this one. The biggest change of this story is simply the fact that in the books, Ciri is not present during this arc. This story is taken from the very first book of the franchise, which takes place like ages before Ciri is even born. So, in the books, she is simply not present there. It is just Geralt, Neville, and the Bruxa. Anyways, apart from that Ciri situation, the story of Neville in the show was captured rather well. It did justice to the books and didn't really lose any of its original meaning either. When it comes to making changes in the show, I think this episode sets a really great example of the kind of changes which are perfectly okay to make. Sadly, the same cannot be said for the remaining episodes of the show because the changes that were made in them were mostly negative. So let's move on to the second episode titled Kaer Morhen. The second episode of this season actually covers two major scenarios. One is Geralt and Ciri reaching Kaer Morhen, and the second is the whole Yennefer's arc with Deathless Mother. And I'm really sad to say this, but this entire arc of Yennefer, this entire season is filler. The portions with Deathless Mother, the part where Yennefer loses her magic powers, none of it happens in the books. It is crazy to me that this Deathless Mother portion was actually the climax of the season when none of it actually even matters. At the end of the season, Yennefer gets her magic back and she comes back full circle. Then she decides to train Ciri. But in the books, since she never lost her magic powers to begin with, so Yennefer starts training Ciri right away after she meets her. And the way she meets her is rather straightforward too. When Ciri and Geralt reach Kaer Morhen, Geralt starts training her. As time passes by, Geralt and other witchers realize that Ciri has some special magical powers and she would occasionally go into a trance where she would prophesize about the future. So, all the witchers at Kaer Morhen starts getting worried and they decide to call Triss to ask for her help. When Triss arrives and she meets Ciri, she realizes that whatever powers Ciri has, they are way beyond her understanding or control. It would take a much more powerful and experienced sorceress to figure out what's going on with Ciri. And that powerful and experienced sorceress is none other than Yennefer. This is how Yen meets Ciri in the books, and she immediately starts training her to help her control her powers. It doesn't take long for Yen and Ciri to form a very deep mother and daughter type of bond. You don't have to worry though, the Netflix series is going to cover all of this, but they'll cover this in season 3. They could have done it in season 2, but I have no idea why they decided to fill this entire season with made up things rather than simply adapting the material from the books. Before we move forward, one last thing I would like to mention is poor Eskel. Oh, how badly did they butcher Eskel's character in the show? It is just disrespectful. What Netflix did to Eskel is pretty much what Hollywood did to Dragon Ball with their movie Dragon Ball Evolution. Basically, think of how Eskel is portrayed in the show. Now, completely flip it and you'll get Eskel from the books. He was like a close brother to not only Geralt but also to Ciri. He was always kind. He helped Ciri train, and on top of that, he was also very smart. If you played The Witcher 3, then you know that Eskel also fought against the Wild Hunt, risking his life to protect Ciri. And that is because he didn't die in the books like he did on the TV show. Press F to pay respect to Eskel, and let's move on to episode 3. The third episode of this season is titled What is Lost, and it focuses on so many different characters and so many storylines. So first off, there is Ciri's training at Kaer Morhen. Then there is Vesemir trying to find out about Eskel and the Leshy that killed him. Then there is the portion with the elves and Francesca being at Sintra forming an alliance with Fringilla Viger. Then there is the banter that Vilgefortz should be named the hero of Sodden instead of Yennefer. Then there is the weird monster who attacks Ciri and Geralt. And finally there is the scene where Yennefer frees Kaer and runs away with him. Well, out of these many storylines, do you want to know how many actually exist in the book? One. Just one. Only Ciri training at Kaer Morhen is the part that actually exists in the book. Everything else is just made up for the show or is changed to such a degree that it is no longer the same. One major thing that I would like to talk to you about, however, is Vilgefortz. Now you need to pay attention to this because this is really important. In the show, they are trying to say that Vilgefortz should be called the hero of Sodden instead of Yennefer for political reasons. In the books, however, Vilgefortz was actually the hero of Sodden for real. During that battle, it was him who took charge and changed the course of the entire battle. Yennefer got hit in the eyes by a fireball and almost went blind during that fight. Vilgefortz was the reason they won that battle in the books. Now don't get me wrong, Yennefer is an insanely powerful sorceress in the books too. She is like crazy strong. However, Vilgefortz is just on another level. In the entire Witcher franchise, there is literally 0 times that Vilgefortz loses a fight at full power. And the only time he does lose, it has some sort of catch to it. Maybe he's in a weakened state, or maybe he's not able to use his power. That is the only time Vilgefortz loses. In the books, this guy is pretty much like Superman. The only way anyone can ever hope to defeat him is by using some sort of kryptonite to weaken him first. No matter which character the book Vilgefortz is fighting, if there is a fair one-on-one battle, always place your bet on Vilgefortz because there is no way he is going to lose. In English language, there is an idiom which says that one should not piss in the wind. It is used when someone does something that is completely ineffective or a waste of time. Well, according to the books, fighting Vilgefortz is like pissing into a hurricane. The 4th episode of the TV show is titled Redanian Intelligence, and it is a weird combination of events that takes place in the books with a twist of the changes that the showrunners made for the TV series. As we already discussed, the entire storyline of Yen losing her powers didn't happen, so her teaming up with Kaer running through the sewers trying to get to Sintra also never happened. This episode also introduced 2 amazing characters from the franchise, Dijkstra and Philippa Eilhart. Well, in her old form. Thankfully, the actor of Dijkstra actually did an amazing job to portray his character. Dijkstra is the king of spies. He always makes his moves from the shadows. It is thanks to Dijkstra's intelligence that many grand events in the Witcher universe happen the way they happen. Both Dijkstra and Philippa hold immense power when it comes to politics and lives of many kings and queens throughout the kingdoms. Other than that, this episode features the portion where Triss arrives at Kaer Morhen to help Ciri. This did happen in the books, but it ended very differently, with Triss concluding that Geralt should seek help from Yennefer instead, because Ciri's powers are just beyond her understanding. Another thing that this episode focuses on is the way that elves are treated on the continent. While the show does portray the situation in a pretty okay manner, but in the books there are two sides to every story. The elves are actually the cause of an uprising in the north. They are trying to raise soldiers to fight against the racism all elves face on the continent. But at the same time, elves are also racist toward other races on the continent, so make of that what you will. The show does portray this, but in a very twisted manner, which is very different from the books. Lastly, let us talk about everyone's favorite bard. The show depicts that Dandelion, or Jaskier, is helping non-humans cross into Sintra, and he meets Yennefer, helps her too, and then gets kidnapped by Rience. Again, none of this happened in the books. He wasn't helping the elves cross into Sintra, because in the books the elves were not allowed into Sintra. Yen didn't lose her powers, so she didn't come to meet Jaskier in that inn. However, Jaskier did get kidnapped by Rience, so let us continue on to the next episode. The fifth episode, titled Turn Your Back, begins with the introduction of Rience and Lydia, two very crucial characters in the books. The TV show reveals that Rience kidnaps Jaskier to get information about Ciri and Geralt from him. This happened pretty much exactly how the show portrays it. Even in the books, Yennefer appears and saves Jaskier from Rience, and even scars his face. The only difference here is that in the books, Yennefer fights Rience for real, because she has her magic powers. In the show, she just spits some alcohol on his face, while in the books, they have a fight of magic. Yennefer, being the badass and crazy powerful sorceress that she is, defeats Rience and burns his face. After this, a portal opens and Rience runs away from there using the portal. Her character is written extremely well in the books, which is why it makes me so sad that with the TV series, they decided to completely butcher her character, take away her powers, make her weaker, because the result of all of that is a character in the show which is only similar to the character in the books in only one aspect, and that is her name. Apart from the Jaskier in distress portion of the episode, everything else that happened in this episode 5 doesn't exist in the books. Istrid and Geralt going to the monoliths, not in the books. Ciri's blood being capable of making more witches, not in the books. Yennefer meeting Deathless Mother, Kaer reaching Sintra, Fringilla Vigo and Francesca helping the elves, none of it exists in the book. The sixth episode of this season is titled Dear Friend. Back in the beginning, when Triss visits Kaer Morhen, in the books, she tells Geralt to ask Yennefer for help regarding Ciri. In response to that, Geralt writes a letter to Yennefer which starts with the words Dear Friend. I highly recommend that you Google this letter and read exactly what Geralt wrote, and then read Yennefer's reply, because you will get insight into how their personalities are in the books from these two letters and their exchanges. Anyways, in the books, Yennefer agrees to help and then she takes care of Ciri from that point onwards. She teaches Ciri magic and ways to control her powers at the temple of Melitele. In the show, they also meet at the temple, but things happen very differently. Yennefer has a completely different agenda and they don't even stay at the temple for very long. There is an entire novel called Blood of Elves, and Ciri's training at the temple is undergoing during this novel. Yennefer and Ciri actually leave the temple of Melitele right at the end of this very novel. Yennefer in the books doesn't have any ulterior motive, an agenda, or any other reason to help Ciri. She is simply helping Ciri because Geralt requested her to. At first, when Ciri and Yennefer meet, Ciri actually dislikes her. But it doesn't take her long to realize that Yennefer truly cares for her. Even when Yennefer is strict with Ciri, she is never angry, upset, or have any ill intentions towards her. Since the time they meet for the first time, Yennefer actually treats Ciri like her own daughter that she never had. This was a big theme in Yennefer's arc for the first season. She really wanted a child, but she couldn't have one. So, when the question arises of whether Yennefer would actually sacrifice Ciri to gain her magic powers, the answer is never. In the books, Yennefer would rather give up her own life. She would drown entire kingdoms in fire and blood before she would let anyone come even close to Ciri with bad intentions. That is the kind of bond Yennefer shares with Ciri in the books. I was actually having this discussion with a friend of mine, and she put it perfectly. Yennefer is a powerful sorceress with strong magical powers, but an even stronger personality. During the time period of the third book where Yennefer is training Ciri at the Temple of Melitele, and actually even after that, Geralt is actually not present there. He has faith that Yennefer will look after Ciri and won't let anyone harm her. Meanwhile, he is actually on a very different mission. Geralt is looking into everyone who might have an agenda or have a reason to come looking for Ciri. And of course, he knows that Rience is one of those people. While the show portrays that Rience with the Michelet brothers find Ciri at the temple and then attack them. In the books, it is actually Geralt who hunts them down and kills the Michelet brothers in Oxenford. Rience again manages to escape with the help of a mysterious mage who is helping him from behind the scenes. Surprisingly, in the books, it is actually Geralt who meets with Codringa and Fen, not Istrid. Geralt meets up with them to ask for help investing the mysterious mage who has been helping Rience from the dark. And also, he wants help from these two regarding the political reasons that everyone is after Ciri for. Apart from this, the rest of the 6th episode is mostly filler too. I'm gonna discuss the final 2 episodes of this season in one go because there is actually not much to discuss in these. One of the episodes is titled Voleth Meir, the Deathless Mother, and the last episode is titled Family. These 2 episodes actually conclude all the plot points that this season has been building up so far. That includes the Deathless Mother, Yennefer's loss of magic, Fringilla's political portion, the elves and their baby, the monoliths, Ciri's possession, and the battle at Kaer Morhen. The thing is, none of these plot points existed in the books to begin with, so none of these conclusions exist in the book either. There are only 2 things in these 2 episodes that are sort of present in the books. The first one being the Wild Hunt, and the second one being the major reveal that the Emperor of Nilfgaard, Emir, was actually Ciri's father. The Wild Hunt portion in the books was pretty much similar. They run after Ciri from time to time and want to capture her. Ciri manages to run away from them in a similar fashion as is depicted in the show. There is actually not much to the Wild Hunt in the first few books. They don't actually become relevant to the story until much later, I think in like the 4th or 5th book. In a similar fashion, Ciri's father, the final reveal of season 2, was that the Emperor of Nilfgaard, Emir var Emrys, the White Flame, the guy who destroyed Sindra, the person behind the war that is taking place in the north, is none other than Ciri's own father. Yes, this is actually accurate to the lore of the books. He is indeed Ciri's father in the books too. However, this reveal in the books happened right at the end of the entire franchise. Right when the entire story is about to end in the final book, Geralt finally comes face to face with Emir, which is when it is revealed that Emir is none other than Ciri's father. because Geralt recognizes his face. The show, on the other hand, actually had no choice, and I think this is one of the changes that are for the good. There are lots of portions in the upcoming books where Meir is shown firsthand and he plays vital role in the story. In the books, he can play that vital role without having his identity revealed, because in the books we never really see his face and he never really comes in touch with anyone who knows about his past. On the show, however, that is not possible, so they decided to reveal this plot twist much earlier, and to be honest, I'm with them on this one. So credit where credit is due. Netflix, good job on this one. So that was the season 2 of Netflix Witcher. My overall thoughts on this season are that it was enjoyable as a show if you switch off your mind and not think about all the plot holes, like how is Geralt and Yennefer traveling to and fro from Kaer Morhen to Sintra so quickly. Even with the plot holes, the second season was actually enjoyable, but it was absolutely terrible as an adaptation. Almost the entire season was nothing but filler content, but even worse than that, all this filler content affected some amazing characters in a very negative way. Yennefer, who is a complete badass in the books, was turned into a magicless girl in the show. Poor Eskel was turned from a gentle person to the complete opposite personality. Vesemir, who is the wisest of all the witches, was shown as a desperate old man. With all these changes, you gotta start wondering, at what point does it stop being a creative decision for the sake of the adaptation and turns into a complete reimagination of the source material, because that is what Netflix has done. To me, Netflix Witcher is no different from all the anime live action movies that are released every other year, like Death Note or Dragon Ball Evolution. Though these movies might be an okay watch as a standalone version for people who haven't experienced the source material, but for the people who have seen the source material, these adaptations only highlight the unnecessary changes in the story, which makes them less of an adaptation and more of a fan fiction, which is just banking on the name of an established IP.